Buongiorno a tutti, è la conferenza stampa di Truth. Come sapete ho il piacere di presentarvi i produttori del film, Andy Spaulding e William Sherrock, e il regista James Vanderbild. Ci sono delle domande, altrimenti comincio io, una domanda al regista. Una domanda al regista, question for director. Quando si è innamorato di questa storia, che è una storia che conosciamo, però forse non conosciamo così bene, nel senso che tutti abbiamo naturalmente saputo di questa inchiesta, però naturalmente forse pochi di noi conoscevano i dettagli. Lei quando si è innamorato di questa storia?
I think the first time I became aware of it, well, first of all, let me just thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for having all of us. We're so happy to be here. So let me start by saying that. I first became aware of it in the United States. There was a big uproar as we dramatized in the film over the story that initially ran on 60 Minutes too. I didn't see the initial story the Wednesday night they ran it, but I certainly saw the coverage starting on Thursday, because it blew up so quickly. And I just sort of watched it as a citizen. I had no sort of interest in it cinematically until I read Mary Mapes' book, which she wrote about a year after all of this happened. So she lost her job and then very quickly wrote a book about it. And so I read that and contacted her, and she was still very much in a defensive crouch about what had happened. And I'd always been fascinated by journalism. If I hadn't gone into the cinema, I wanted to go into journalism. So for me, it was always sort of the road not taken. So I'd always been fascinated by films that take place in that world and characters who live in that world. And at the same time, I'd been looking for something to try and direct for the first time. So I think all of those things together, when I read her book and met with her and started to talk to her and get to know her as a person, and she's an incredible woman, all of those things made me think this could be a good film.
Ci sono delle domande? Allora, una domanda qui intanto. Una domanda qui davanti? Prego.
Sempre per il regista, naturalmente, Catelo Masuro e il parere dell'ingegnere. Senta, la vicenda sembra delineata molto bene con tanti grandi particolari. Volevo capire, diciamo, se ci può svelare quanto c'è di assolutamente vero, reale, e quanto ha inventato, quanto c'è del libro che probabilmente sarà molto aderente, e quanto invece è stato creato da voi per la fizione, per renderla più, diciamo così, appassionante e così coinvolgente come in effetti appare. Grazie.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind words. The thing about a story like this is there are so many different opinions on what happened, and so the way that we approached this was first to start with the book and to read it through, and then to start testing all of those facts. And so I spent a lot of time with Mary Mapes. I spent a lot of time with Dan Rather, who was kind enough to open up his home to us and to tell us his stories. I spoke to a lot of people who were on the team who put the story together. I spoke to a lot of people who were around it, both on and off the record. You know, some people were willing to speak, but not officially to me. And I tried to be as journalistic in putting it together as possible, because I felt that you have to tell a film from a point of view. You have to tell it through the eyes of the protagonist. But I wanted to have as much information about what happened and as many different points of view on what happened as possible, so that when I sat down to write it, I could try and filter all of that as best I could, and then take you through the experience and through the eyes of the main character and the emotional story of it. But I really worked hard not to invent anything, and some of the most incredible things that happened were things that, some of the things that you you would go, oh my gosh, it's such a movie thing, like her relationship with her father, and the fact that she would get beat up when she was a child for asking questions and grew up to ask questions of incredibly powerful people. You can't make that up. And the relationship between her and Dan Rather, that there's a surrogate father-daughter thing there, that came out of spending time with Mary and Dan and watching how they interact and how they take care of each other. And they're still friends, they're still very close. So all of that was very real. And all of that was stuff that I really wanted to put in the film. You know, the sort of the facts and the figures and the documents, all of that was well documented. So that wasn't the difficult part for us. The difficult part for us was getting the emotional truth of the story in there. And we worked very, very hard to do it. But we you know, I think filmically, you know, the only sort of invention really is what you leave out, is what you don't have time to tell, or what you have to sort of omit to tell a 2-hour story as opposed to, you know, a 10-hour documentary.
Network di Verbidoli. La mia domanda era per Mary Mapes, che però non vedo, mi dispiace.
Perché posso dire
sì,
solamente
grazie.
che è arrivata è in ritardo con l'aereo, avrebbe dovuto essere qui, ma c'è stato un problema con l'aereo purtroppo.
Ho capito, grazie. E allora a questo punto, aspetti perché sennò mi travolgo, no? Qua. Ah, ok, grazie, scusi. A questo punto io vorrei sapere cosa ha spinto il regista a fare del libro un film e fino a che punto effettivamente si è arrivati alla verità sul caso sia Bush sia Mary Mapes. Grazie. Perché ci sono 2 casi qui, no?
Sure. The reason I really wanted to make it is I was so taken with her as a person, and so taken with, you know, in the United States, the United States I grew up in, journalism was you got your sort of hard news from the 3 anchors of the 3 major networks. When I was born in 1975, and so Dan Rather took the anchor chair in 1981. So since the time I was 6 years old, this man's voice was the voice that gave me and my family and many, many other families news. And Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw, who were on the other networks. It was those 3 men. Now I have 10,000 voices in my pocket now who I can get the news from. And that's not better or worse, but it's very, very different. And now, 11 years after this happened, looking sort of back, and the journalism, the societally what I grew up with journalistically, to what we have now, this moment is an enormous turning point and tipping point between those 2 things. It's the first time the internet really rose up and affected a news story with the speed that we now all live with in terms of how quickly things happened. I have a friend calls it the 24-second news cycle. And I thought that was a fascinating story to tell, and a fascinating point sort of in our history of media and journalism. And then at the center of it is this incredible woman and this incredible man, and sort of the fall of a king. It's almost Shakespearean in a way. It's, you know, it's the king never knows that, you know, they're out to get him until he gets got. So it was all those sort of things. And in terms of former President Bush, what was interesting to me were the stakes of the story they were going after. I mean, it was right at the height of an election, and you know, if you were in the States, it was, you know, it was 3 years after the attacks of September 11th for us. We as a country were in completely new territory, a new place, and this was our first presidential election since then. And it was hotly contested, and one of the biggest things they were debating, and you see it in the film, is military service. So the stakes could not have been higher for the story they were pursuing. So all of those things together, mixed in, for me, made it just such an exciting and fascinating tale. And we worked very hard to be as accurate as possible in terms of the work they did journalistically. We worked very hard to leave the questions open to the audience in a way, because I love films that ask questions of audiences rather than give them answers. So in a way, it's very much up to you to decide what you believe really happened and what you take away from it. And our job is to just give you that information in hopefully an entertaining and interesting way. So I'm very proud of the film, but it's up to you to judge whether we succeeded or not.
Buongiorno, Federico Pontigia. Ascolti, due cose. Innanzitutto, oltre ai complimenti per il film, volevo sapere, il suo compito da regista, dice, è stato quello di dare i fatti, ma nel film più volte si dice, ma tu ci credi? Ecco, dal punto di vista emotivo, lei crede di aver raffigurato degli sconfitti, dei responsabili o dei colpevoli? Seconda domanda invece, visto che lo conoscevamo prima di questo esordio come sceneggiatore soprattutto di Amazing Spider-Man, ha mai pensato a questo film come un film di supereroi, questi giornalisti in fase di estinzione? Grazie.
I thank you very much for your kind words. I think journalists are heroes. I mean, I'm on the record about that. I think it's an incredibly important profession, and it's a profession that just as a society it keeps us healthy in a way. And as Mary says in the film, and it's a very simple thing, and so people might think it's cliche, but I believe it's true. Is asking questions is so incredibly important, and asking questions of people in power is such an important thing for our society. So I definitely look at journalists as heroes, and I think it's if some conversation can come out of this and where we are sort of as societies and where our media is, that would be great. I'm trying to remember the other part of your question. If that answers it. Oh, journalists are superheroes?
Yes, do you think they're superheroes?
I do think they're superheroes. They're superheroes in a very different way, and it's a very different, type of film to be able to work on than Spider-Man, which was really fun. I like to work in different genres and play in different sandboxes. So this was, a different type of challenge, because you want to make a film exciting and you want to make people on the edge of their seats, but you're not blowing up cars and having people swing off buildings. So it has to be done with words and tension and hopefully great acting from actors like this.
Sì, prima della prossima domanda, io invece vorrei chiedere...
La prima domanda non mi ha risposto. Come li considera? Se li considera dei colpevoli, dei responsabili o degli sconfitti? Mary Mapes e il suo team, diciamo.
I think they're human in a way. I think it's a very interesting job, because Dan Rather has said journalism is the rough draft of history, but it's a rough draft. And we talked about, because Mary's book is very, it's a wonderful book, but she's very raw when she writes it, and certain people don't come off nearly as well, especially at CBS. And it was important for me to portray everyone as, everybody in this film is trying to do their job the best they can. And that's a very difficult thing sometimes. That becomes almost, impossible for some of them. But that doesn't mean that they're not trying their best. And that's why we called the film Truth, is because it's this thing that they're all after. It's the thing that they're trying to get to, and it's elusive and it's tricky, and your career can end up dashing on the rocks. But it's if you go after it, but it's still incredibly important. So I don't think that I think there is a tragedy to this, certainly, and I think that Dan Rather and Mary as well. Mary, who is not well known, was not famous, but had a phenomenal 15-year career at CBS and has been in journalism for over 20 years. So there's certainly a tragedy to them not being able to continue doing the thing they love and the thing that they were good at.
Sì, prima della prossima domanda io volevo chiedere ai produttori, prima James faceva questo parallelo, accennava a questo parallelismo tra il giornalismo e il cinema, no? Che in fondo sono due modi diversi ma che hanno molto in comune raccontare una storia. Voi perché avete creduto in questa storia e che cosa può raccontare questa storia in un momento in cui forse come dire, il giornalismo investigativo fa così fatica ad andare avanti e forse certe scoperte clamorose sono affidate agli hackers più che ai giornalisti che riescono a infiltrarsi nei computer. Ecco, quindi il senso di questo film in questo momento storico.
I think for me, I'll start with the second part. For me, one of the amazing points in history for this film specifically is this was the start for me of journalistic integrity changing. And what, as James said, the three anchors in the US that we all grew up with on the three major networks, there was a certain amount of integrity that came with each story you believed they were putting on. And when the blogosphere came on and started attacking the media in a different way, all of a sudden that integrity changed. And the 24-second news cycle became this thing where if something wasn't true, it didn't matter. Just the next thing above it became the next story, and something that wasn't true that was written just got moved down on the page and we forgot about it. So I think that from that standpoint, that was the important part. From this specific story being told, I think for myself and my partner Brad Fisher, who were partners with Jamie in Mythology, this story specifically was something that Jamie came to us with and said, I want to direct this story. And for us, it was supporting that and saying, Jamie wants to make the move to a director and become this filmmaker. And we're going to support him in his vision of how to tell this. And this story was important to him, so it became important to us. And then when you dig into it, it's such an amazing story. When you meet Mary, you meet Dan, you fall in love with what this story is and what Jamie wanted to do with it. So for this story specifically, for us, it was taking our partner and letting him become a director and getting his vision up on the screen and doing everything we can to support that.
And I would agree with William about the importance of this particular film. I should start by saying what drew us to this, of course, was an amazing screenplay by one of our finest screenwriters. So I should start with that. An amazing story of a woman at the top of her game who gets toppled and has to sort of pull her life back together. But as to its importance, aside from a piece of important entertainment, what it underscored for us was the importance of a free and investigative press, and that be free from interference, that the ability to ask those difficult questions and to probe things as sensitive as the presidency of the United States was incredibly important to our democracy and incredibly important to any society. And so asking those questions and showing the price of that, the high cost of seeking the truth, we felt was a very compelling and an important movie, and we wanted to be a part of supporting it. And so we're very proud of it.
Congratulations on the film, I really enjoyed it. Since the US release of the film, there seems to be a sense that the film was a bit soft on Rathers and Mary, especially given the state of journalism today, criticism both by left-wing, right-wing bloggers. How would you respond to that criticism? Also given the fact that, the network allowed the story to be run in the first place, just kind of, how would you respond to what's the kind of reaction to the film now?
Sure. I mean, there was, we were aware that there was no version of making this movie that was going to make everybody happy. I mean, it's just not that, CBS released a statement, and we've gotten questions about that, and the reaction is always, well, what do you expect them to say? Thank you? I think, we dramatized, in terms of Dan and Mary, you call up Dan Rather and you say, I want to make a movie about you, but I don't want to make a movie about all the amazing things you've done. I want to make a movie about the most difficult professional thing you've ever gone through, and I want to dramatize in exacting detail how all of this fell apart and how you ultimately lost your dream job. And so it's up to other people to say whether we're soft on it or not, but I feel like the last hour of the movie is sort of a slow-moving car crash where you watch these people's lives come apart, and I had the privilege to watch both of them watch the film, and it certainly didn't feel to me that they felt it was soft on them. So, I mean, everyone is absolutely entitled to their opinion, and I hope they see the movie and make up their own minds, but you know, we worked very, very hard to do the best job we can to tell the story as honestly as possible.
Yes, Tricia Thomas, can you see me over here? Associated Press Television. I was wondering if you could put this movie sort of in our modern context, where again, in a political election year, it seems to me that maybe things have only gotten worse in terms of journalists being able to find the truth because of the blogosphere, the reporting, the negative reporting, the spin doctors. How do you see it in our context right now with a political election, whether it's with Hillary's emails or whatever you want to put it in? And the second question is, you did an excellent job getting Kate Blanchett to accurately, I am a TV producer, so portray a TV producer. How did you do that?
Well, I'll go in order. So then the first one, putting in context, I guess, for what's going on right now. In terms of the political arena, I mean, what's fascinating is just how much harder it is, I think, to get investigative pieces done, just because people don't have the time. And you know, in the film, they crashed the story in 5 days. Now, you know, speaking to produce, and you can speak to this probably better than I can, but 5 days is a lifetime to get to work on a story now. So I think that in terms of that, the loss of longer lead investigative journalism, I think, is something to be concerned about. In terms of Kate, it's helpful to cast someone who has 2 Academy Awards. Certainly helped. And you know, the thing about Kate is she, you know, forgive the language, she works her ass off. She really does. And she read the screenplay. She decided after a half hour on the phone with me that she wanted to do it. She just won the Academy Award for Blue Jasmine, and for some reason decided it would be a good idea to work with a first-time director next. So more power to her, and she threw herself into the role. She did a ton of research. She spoke to Mary a lot. They Skyped a lot, and she tried to get the mannerisms down, and just learned about what the job is. And it was, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, hopefully not ad nauseum, getting the feeling of it right was really important to us, and the feeling of what that job is. I love movies that can take you behind the curtain of something, and make you feel like it. And that's the most fun part of my job, is I actually get to go and sit with people and say, okay, so how does this work? How do you do this? When you get up in the morning, when you make your first phone call, when you check your email. So all of that, you know, we wanted to make sure we weaved into this film as much as possible. So you really came away with a feeling of what it was like to work on a story in broadcast journalism.
Buonasera, volevo fare una domanda ai produttori, sono Roberto Sapienza di My Generation Web. Vista dall'ottica italiana, si potrebbe, chiedo scusa, pensare che questo film a un anno dalle elezioni americane possa essere una sorta di warning agli elettori: attenzione, la famiglia Bush potrebbe tornare con Jeff Bush e quindi pensateci bene a chi voterete alle primarie? E la seconda cosa, al regista, se era possibile, se crede che non è la prima volta quest'anno che vediamo un film su giornalisti d'assalto americani. A Venezia abbiamo visto Spotlight. Se pensa che ci siano ancora giornalisti veramente capaci di non avere paura di nulla e di andare a testa bassa e attaccare il potere, perché molto spesso si dice che i giornalisti, almeno questo si dice, siano ammansueti al potere. Grazie.
Either way, I should say that the film doesn't take a particular viewpoint on the Bush or the current election. the Bush family, it asks a question and it leaves it to the audience and to all of us to wonder about what happened in this particular case. So that there certainly is, at its core, a story about a woman and what happened to her. And the film is very specific to not take a position vis-a-vis the Bush family or the Bush presidency.
I mean, I would agree completely. I think the movie, to me, it's how the sausage gets made. It's not taking the stance against the Bush family, and especially going into an election cycle. I think what it does do, though, is it says in these cycles you should ask questions and you should want the answers and you should want the truth. And I do want to believe there are a lot of journalists out there who are willing to stand up to power and ask the tough questions. And I think it's just, in a lot of the noise that exists today, I think it's just harder to find. But I think if you search it out, it's there.
And I would harken back to the question that the previous questioner asked. In many ways, the movie's a cautionary tale. And you know, when we hear Mary Mapes in the boardroom talking about the way stories are spun and the way that the noise overtakes the question, I think that was a cautionary kind of message to all of us, and it's certainly a representative of what's happening today.
They covered it as well. I mean, just from a very practical level, I can say that, you know, that when we started working on the film, we had no idea who was running for president. So it wasn't, you know, 2 years ago, we had no sort of conception of who was going to be in and who was going to be out. So there was no design on that. And when we made it, and one of the things, you know, we talked about with Robert Redford, was the same way that All the President's Men is not really about Richard Nixon. This film's not really about George W. Bush. It's about the journalism and it's about the process.
Congratulations, sir, on the 2 hours of wonderful entertainment that you've just given us. If the Academy don't give you a double Oscar for this, they simply show us again that they don't know what they're doing. Both for your direction and for your script of a whole. Of course, the film is intriguing. I'm Jack Buckley from Seen and Heard International. The film is intriguing to anybody in journalism because it's quaintly historical in ways which you are perfectly aware of. But watching the film, because you're so wonderful at drawing us into the extraordinariness of what's going on with the action, you don't take account of the fact that you're watching something which happened all these years ago. Since Alan Rusbridger became editor of The Guardian in London, he's the first senior editor anywhere that took into real understanding and account of how there was a revolution in journalism because of cyberspace. And the tie-in that he immediately made with the New York Times is all part of that. That's not a good movie for you, by the way. And I'm sure Rusbridger would be a willing collaborator because that created various earthquakes, as you very well know. Now, the other thing is, where's Mary? We journalists were promised we were going to be able to have a chance to speak with her or ask her things. Is there any chance of that happening? Maybe the translator knows something about that.
She literally, her plane was delayed 4 hours, so she's landing, I believe, at 3 o'clock.
We're not hiding her from you.
We are not at all, and I'm very sad she's not here, because she's, I mean, much more interesting than I am. So I do apologize for her not being here, but she will be there tonight.
Right, and I think our understanding is that we're working to make arrangements to make her available to some press.
Yes.
So apologies, but it's strictly because of the time today.
And thank you so much for your kind words. It is true, we do agree Jamie deserves a ton of accolades for this film.
Thank you.
E non so se abbiamo ancora un minuto, un'ultimissima veloce domanda qui. Veloce però, per favore. Abbiamo tempo strettissimo.
Buongiorno.
No, veramente era il signore lì che aveva la mano alzata, scusami, da un bel po' di tempo.
Grazie mille, prima di tutto, I'll talk to you in English. Thank you very much
First of all, congratulations for your film. I wanted to ask, because you stated how you felt that journalism have been democratized from the time of three main companies and now the blogs. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about filmmaking being also democratized at this time with the time of YouTube, all these people doing videos with a smartphone, which the next day will be on YouTube?
I mean, as a filmmaker, I think it's incredible. I wish when I was a kid and trying to figure out how to have somebody in my family buy a video camera that cost hundreds of dollars so I could mess around with, and for no reason they should never let me mess around with something that cost $100 because I was 7 years old. But how to get my hands on something like that. And so the fact that kids and teenagers who are interested in film now have those tools right there to play with and experiment with, I think is so wonderful. And I think I think things are about to explode in a really interesting way in cinema. And again, it's going to be different. I think we grew up with the big screen and going to darkened theaters, and I love that. And that's my generation and my era. But that's not maybe future generations. But just the fact that people can get their art out there in an easier way and fashion, I cannot imagine that being a bad thing. And so I'm so excited about that as a filmmaker and as a fan of film.
Purtroppo il nostro tempo a disposizione è finito, grazie moltissimo. Grazie.
Thank you so much.